When it comes to winter bass fishing, sometimes you just need to slow things down and work that bottom. And for me, well, that means jigs a lot of the time. And whether you love them or whether you hate them, I'm going to show you some really interesting and new ways to rig and work your jigs that, if you have problems with them, maybe it will convince you to go back and give them another try. Stick around, you don't want to miss this one.
Oh, I got him. Nope, I missed it. Did I get it? No, yeah, I got him. Ooh, he didn't know he was hooked. He didn't know he was hooked. That one feels pretty good. He was running at me. What do we got? Oh, that's a nice bass, kids. That is a nice bass.
Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing. And yes, old Lowbrow's doing another jig fishing video. But this one's different, I can assure you. See, over the past few years, there have been a lot of innovations, not just in jig styles, but in the trailers that go with them. You say, well, what more can you do with the jig? They're pretty simple. You've got a weight right here at the head, which is either lead or tungsten. You've got a skirt of some sort. You've got a hook and a brush card. What can you do to innovate on that? It's pretty simple as it is. But there's been some designs that have really improved jig fishing for a lot of different circumstances and situations. And not just the jigs, but the trailers as well. The result is you have an increased efficiency on the water, better presentations, which lead to more and better bites. And if you're someone who isn't comfortable with fishing a jig, you've not had a lot of success doing it, watch this video all the way through, and I'm pretty sure I can convince you to give them another try. And if you like bass fishing content that's inclusive for both bank anglers and boat anglers, always with a focus on budget, because not everybody's got a lot of money to spend on bass fishing gear, then I'm asking you, click that subscribe button. And while you're down there, give this video a like. I would really, really appreciate it. But, you know, the good old jig, right? This is what we think of. And this is a normal half-ounce flipping jig. I've caught, I don't know, I can't tell you how many fish I've caught on this thing. I love it. It's great for flipping mats. It's great for combing through that thick vegetation, punching the holes in the hydrilla. And with that heavier hook, that heavier stout hook in there, I can really pull those big girls out. And when we think of a jig trailer, we generally think of two different types, don't we? First off, the chunk trailer. This is the classic. This is the one that Grandpa used. This is the one that we probably all learned how to use or started using whenever we were fishing jigs. There's two ways to rig these on here, although a lot of people don't know that. We all think of the standard way, the one that we pretty much think about now, right? Where you take it and you thread it on. You push it up the hook, you pop it in, push it all the way up, and boom, there you go, right? That's what most people think of. It's fairly compact. There's not a lot of action to it, as those flaps really don't have a lot of kick to them. But this is a great technique, a great presentation, especially when those bass are cold and lethargic. But there's another way to rig one of these on here, you know, and this is actually the way that I learned, is you just take it and you hook it on like that. And believe it or not, most of us learn this way to start out with. This is how we rigged jigs back in the day, especially when you started with something like these. Good old Uncle Josh's pork frogs, right? And I've still got a few jars of these. I still have a few that I've got stashed. I try to hold on to them as much as I can, because while they came out with newer variety and redid the company, those old ones are still the ones that you want to get. So a lot of old bass anglers, we hoard those things as much as we can. But that's your typical chunk style trailer. That's what a lot of people use. That's what we've all started working with. It's a great trailer and it catches fish. Now the next type of trailer is the more common one nowadays. It's the one that a lot of people have switched to, and that is the good old crawl trailer. And these aren't bad. There's several ways to rig these and several ways to work these. They have their advantages, but at the same time, they also have their disadvantages. All right, when talking about a craw trailer, and this is just a Strike King Rage Craw. This is probably, in my estimation, the most common craw trailer for a jig. Everybody loves these. And you have different types of craw trailers. I also have an affinity for the Googan Kraken craw because of its smaller size. And we're going to get into that because size of the trailer is important, you know. And you just thread these on here, right? You just take it and you thread it on, and you make sure that you get it on there nice and straight, because straighter is always better. Pop that hook point out at the right spot and push it all the way up there. And that's a great looking jig right there. That will catch a lot of fish. But say we want to go smaller. Say this is too big and those bass are looking for a more compact presentation. Well, we have to cut that down, don't we? And a lot of us will cut it down, we'll bite it down, and depending on what jig we're using, depends on how many of these little nodules we'll cut into. I like to go to about there most of the time, and it leaves me, let's say, another 3 inches on a 4-inch crawl like that. Works great. You can shrink that package down and not have to shrink the size of the jig down. You can still fish the deeper water with a heavier jig. It works so well, so it's a great way to work a jig. But what about the new style? What about the new ones that I've been talking about? That's where something like this comes in. Now, I've mentioned this in a video before, and this is a 6th Sense jig, and I believe they're called the angle jig or something like that. I wish I would have kept the package. I didn't. But the thing that I like about them, you'll notice right off the bat, there's no brush guard, and it's got that screw lock right there. Plus, it's also got a great big EWG hook. This is a 1/2 ounce version, and it's on a wobble head. So this is basically a combination between a wobble head and a jig. And these things are really, really awesome because they come through just like butter. They don't have any trouble coming through the thickest vegetation. And that's what I really like about them, because with a regular style jig, even with that brush guard on there, I'm going to get hung up in that thick hydrilla. So I'm mainly just punching the empty holes. But a lot of times, even in that thicker stuff, because I'll be fishing 7, 8, 9 feet of water, and on the big lake, there is still a ton of vegetation at those depths. So I can take something like this, and it's really easy to work. It's really easy to, you do it basically like you would do, your swim bait. If you work swim baits, you take that, you take the end of your craw, and you twist it on there. Give it a few good twists all the way up how you want it. Get it on there, and then you take it and you Texas rig it, right? Line it up, poke it through, pop it out, Tex pose it, and you're good to go. Now, this is going to be a bigger presentation. Obviously, this is going to be a longer presentation. But the thing about this is with that EWG, it's going to need a larger trailer. So a lot of times I'm not going to be cutting these down just as much. So if I do want to cut it down, I'm usually only doing the first or second little nodule there, so I can still have plenty of room to Tex pose that bait, and it'll have some action under the water. It won't be all the way here at the end, because a lot of times you want to keep not just the flappers, but you also want to keep that body so it looks more natural to the bass. Also, whenever I'm fishing, say, in the wintertime, and things get a little bit cold, and those bass get a little bit lethargic, well, I might actually go down to something like this. And this right here, this is a little flipping jig. This is a little 1/4 ounce. I might go to a bitsy flip or something like this, because a lot of times those bass just want a smaller presentation. And what I've been doing for the past few years is, well, for my trailer, I take a Senko, I take a stick bait, and I like to cut it right there at the egg sac. And I'm keeping this side, and I can use that as my jig trailer. And if you've watched the videos I did last winter on jig fishing, this was one of the primary ways I did it. See, it's very much a compact little tasty snack, and you can even go shorter than that if you want to. I've used a 1/4 ounce and a 3/16 ounce jig, and I've had a lot of great success doing that with these jigs. So as I mentioned, there's not just new types of jigs, but there's also new types of jig trailers that we can use. And one of the more common ones that you're seeing now are these chunk craw trailers, right? Now, a lot of guys, they say these are pointless. They say just take a regular rage craw and cut it down. And there's an argument for that, but I prefer to use these. Number one, That's one less step that I have to do. Number two, that's less waste that I have in my boat. Number three, a lot of times I like to use those full-size rage craws on a Texas rig. And if I keep cutting them down, well, then I won't have any left to do that with. These are perfect. Plus, they work great on a smaller jig. I can use these on a 3/8 ounce, or I can use these on a 1/4 ounce jig and still have that craw trailer. Now, like I said, I can do that with this. I can take that stick bait, but a lot of times, if I want that fat, bulkier presentation, I can take and I can put this on here. And it's pretty easy to work. You know, you just thread it on. And I've got a really tight, compact, small, little tasty jig that looks like a craw. Looks like a small craw. And a lot of times that's more what I want to do. Now, obviously I wouldn't be using this type of chunk trailer on this type of jig, this color scheme, most of the time. I'd probably use brown, or I'd use green on that. But for the sake of argument, this is what I'm trying to show you, this right here. So this is a great little tasty snack. You just drag it on the bottom and those bass go nuts for it. But believe it or not, there's something even smaller than this that I discovered, and it works so well. And that is these little net bait craws. These things are tiny, and they make the perfect jig trailers for even the smallest jigs. You can see just how much smaller that little, this is called a pack-a-chunk, I believe. And these got the net bait net fuel in them. Now, I don't honestly know if that makes much of a difference, but say you want to fish something like, well, a tiny little finesse jig. And you can see I've got one of these rigged up on this little finesse jig. Now, in my lake, I can't really work a finesse jig in the vegetation because that ball head and the line tie, it does get gummed up. But in a lot of the open spots that I find where I've got some hard clay bottom and I've got some hard sandy bottom, or I have some gravel or whatnot, this can work exceptionally well. A little type of jig with, well, a little type of trailer on it. And I can use these on various different types of setups. You know, I mean, I have my main jig setup. Let's talk about that for a second. This is my main type of jig setup. This is my main jig rod whenever I'm in my little plastic boat. Now, if I'm in my bass buggy or another type of boat, I'll actually have a longer rod. This is a 7.3. This is a heavy, fast. And I've got the great big honkin' 400 size reel on here. This is an Abu Garcia, and I believe this is a max 40. Now, this has a slower gear ratio because whenever I'm fishing that really thick slop, I'm not making long casts, so I don't need an 8-to-1 gear ratio reel because I'm not winding in much line. And when I do have a higher gear ratio reel, when I'm flipping that stuff, a lot of times when I hook into a big girl or I get her caught in a slop, I need a winch to get it out. I need to really be able to work with it and pull that bass out of there. And this reel does that for me. This is basically like a 10-ton winch I've got in the front of my truck, and it just pulls it right up out of the water. So that's what I like with this. And again, right here, this is a 3/4 ounce flipping jig. And these are perfect for punching those holes in those tight areas. Now, as far as what we were talking about just before, you know, I could switch out to something like this on this same setup if I was looking more to drag those areas, and that would work just as well. Now, for my normal jig fishing, whenever I'm just dragging a jig, I've got some deeper water, I've still got some vegetation, but that's where I have this guy. This is my normal standard setup. I've got 40-pound braid, premium braid on here, the good stuff. Pay attention. You need to make sure you've got the good braid. Otherwise, you'll be having snapbacks, you'll be getting bird's nest, and it just won't work the way you want it to. So this is the good stuff I've got on here. This is a 7-foot medium heavy rod, and you can see I've got a 3/8 ounce wobble head jig on there, and I've got a full size cross trailer. This, I was just pulling along the bottom. I was working about 15 feet of water with this and just dragging the bottom through those clumps of hydrilla. And it was able to do great work for me. I really, really like these jigs. The more that I work with these things, the more I really like them because they just come right through the thickest vegetation, just like butter. Now, sometimes I'll have a little bit of grass on there that I have to pick out, but for the most part, not a problem at all. They're great jigs, and if you get a chance, look them up. They're made by 6 Cents. Again, I wish I remember what the name was, but they're just great little jigs. That doesn't mean that we have to have everything like hitting the fish over the head with a great big hammer. I like to use finesse jigs too. When I'm using the small jigs, like we talked about, whenever we're using these finesse jigs or little bitsy flips or something like that, I will actually throw that on a spinning combo. And this right here, you can see I've already got a 1/4 ounce bitsy flip on here that I was working the other day. And I had one of these. I had one of these little net bait trailers on here. There we go. That's the one that I had. I had one of these on there in the right color. And I was able to work it for a few fish in some more shallow water near some flooded brush. I was working up under some flooded brush. But just a little simple jig with those tiny little trailers. It's a very small, it's a very compact presentation, and those bass love that this time of year. And I was working that orange-brown color because in my lake, the bass are just now finding those crawfish as they begin to wake up. They're not molted yet. They've been eating a lot of the clay, a lot of the sediment, so they tend to be a brownish orange in my lake. And this replicates that very well. A 7-foot medium. This is a medium moderate rod. I like that because that allows me to work this bait with a gentle hand. And a lot of times that's what you're going to be looking for. I've got 10-pound premium braid on here. Again, this is the good stuff. I'll work it to maybe a 6-foot, and I've got an 8-pound co-poly leader on this. I like that for just a little bit more added stretch. It works really well. So you don't have to hit them over the head with a hammer. You can use a finesse spinner and a small jig and really catch some nice fish on some really big bites. So there you have it. A pretty good look at some of the newer styles of jigs and the newer styles of trailers to go with them. As I said before, if you have trouble fishing jigs, you don't have a lot of success with them, try some of these newer techniques out. I'm telling you, it will improve your chances. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.